Good afternoon. Welcome back to Accidentally DeFi, where we talk about the latest and the greatest. Today we're trying a new model, or at least I am. I just got a lot to talk about, got a lot of things to discuss. There's a lot of things going on. And today the discussion is why the Federal Reserve will cut interest rates. It's quite simple, the way I look at it. You know, Marvin Gaye is one of my favorite artists. I know I just like we talking about interest rates. When I developed a more advanced understanding of monetary and fiscal policy, I got into vinyl records around the same time. I sat down to this album with a glass of whiskey and I listened to it in completion with an earnest heart. I realized that economics, for all my love of numbers, the quantitative data, which is the basis of macroeconomics, was all about the people and how the people were feeling. That's what the basis of economics is. We try to make it seem very high minded, but if the people don't feel good, the economy is not good. Marvin Gaye's What's Going On was released in May of 1971 and detailed the conditions of the Black American at that time, including inflation, taxation, drug abuse, and police brutality. As an economist, I don't see this as unrelated to the suspension of the gold standard, which occurred later that year in August. More than that, I saw an obvious comparison with our current era, which I have dubbed the Great Uncertainty following the Great Recession. And of course, Marvin Gaye was singing in the beginning of the Great Inflation. We endured rising and persistent inflation since 2020. We endured a tax system which does not favor most of us. We endure significant drug use and rising deaths of despair. We endure significant unrest. And why? It is because the American economy, as it is presented to each of us, is no longer effective in delivering for us. While I could begin my rant into rentier capitalism, that's not why I'm recording today. We'll save that for another cap. Since 2020, we've had what we call a K-shaped recovery. That means, just like the shape of a K, you got one group was going up, another group is going down at the same time, right? So prices have soared much higher. Median wages are negative for most of the working class, while prices are higher. There has emerged a class of Americans who are largely safe from the recent inflation, and I will list them here. Persons who own homes on the 1st of December 2019. While rent inflation has inflated at about 40 to 50% in the last 6 years, these people have largely been protected due to fixed rates of interest and fixed monthly mortgage costs, notwithstanding the possibility to refinance when rates were extremely low in 2021. People who own equities, commodities, crypto, and real estate have gone on an impressive run in the last 6 years. These people have made more than enough money to eat the cost of living increases. Last group, people who are established in their field of work. The wages have outpaced inflation mostly between the 2010s and 2000s. So while they've lost purchasing power, they are ahead of most because they spent so much time being ahead of inflation. They may be 25 points ahead of inflation over that 20-year period between 2000 and 2010s. So if inflation jumps up in these recent history and they possibly, they're fine and they're, also as people age, their expenditures decline. So that means that these people would not have felt inflation the way young people might have. This class of Americans are known as the top 10%, my favorite top. All right. These people make up about 50% of consumption. About 70% of gross domestic product in the US is consumption. So that is to say, these people are effectively 35% of US GDP. All right. The bottom 90% of Americans have been experiencing recession since July of 2022 with negative wage growth, higher costs for necessities, and now artificial intelligence and automation taking effect in the job market. The outlook for the bottom 90% is grim. However, the Federal Reserve has been given the tough job of getting us out into a smooth landing. What is the smooth landing Jerome Powell talks about? It's just a situation where we don't cause a recession. That's it. I'm going to raise interest rates without causing a recession. And he's pretty much done that. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell tasked himself with getting us to a smooth landing, a situation where he was able to combat inflation without causing a significant uptick in unemployment. Inflation and unemployment have been discussed as if they operate inversely. One goes up, the other goes down, right? If you have a whole bunch of people that are employed, getting wages, they're receiving money, they're spending more money, so inflation goes up because aggregate demand is up. Whereas if you have a whole bunch of people that are unemployed, they don't have wages, aggregate demand declines. So, under normal conditions, what the Federal Reserve has accomplished would be seen as impossible, but it has delivered something of smooth landing with a few changes. First, inflations will likely never see 2% again, and this is probably because fiscal deficits now run structurally at 6% of GDP. Furthermore, the Federal Reserve's policy directly affects the interest on the debt, which is now more than 100% of US GDP. Second, unemployment will rise if rapid innovation occurs surrounding AI and automation and reduces the demand for human labor. The investment in AI and automation is speeding up dramatically as corporations look to reduce their dependence on human labor and human error more broadly. This investment race has led to something of a bubble in the US stock market, which has increased the net worth of the top 10% of Americans dramatically in the last 5 years. This is called the wealth effect. Increases in the asset prices increase consumer confidence and then increase consumer spending. However, should this bubble be allowed to be popped, we would see the reverse wealth effect, the decline in asset prices, reducing consumer confidence and reducing consumer spending. A reduction in consumer spending at the top 10% would surely guarantee a recession, considering that they are currently about 35% of GDP. Their consumption is 35% of GDP. The subsequent recession would increase unemployment among the bottom 90%, further exacerbating the K-shaped recovery we've been in since 2020. A rate cut would offer a chance to exacerbate inflation further. What is uncommonly said is that the Federal Reserve has three mandates. The first two are often said together: maximum employment, stable prices, right? The third is the most forgotten and the most important: to ensure the solvency of the American government. With rising interest payments and waning buyers for the US debt overseas, it is objective for the Federal Reserve to finance the US government. If the Federal Reserve doesn't act in the interest of financial markets, it could create an economic crisis. This isn't to say that it isn't a problem that the jobs that put food on the tables for Americans, millions of Americans, should exist at the whim of shareholder return quarter on quarter. This is a problem, and fixing it will require the destruction of the stock market as we know it and a shockingly high unemployment rate in the short term. If the Federal Reserve doesn't give the markets what they want, then the reverse wealth effect will reduce consumption and unemployment will rise as companies respond to reduced consumption and to shareholder calls to reduce costs.